and I haven't given enough shiurim this month in the kollel. It's been a while since I was in the kollel, so I hope to do better next month. And because it is the day after tomorrow is Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and usually before Yom Kippur we speak a little bit about the Yonah Dayoma. So today's shiur will be in Shlit and in Hilchas Pesach, and we will try to build a bridge between two l'cha'ora different sugyas. And the topic we are discussing is, do we rely on roiv and kazoka and other halachas b'mokem she'efshar levarer? And whenever I speak about dina kazoka, you feel like jumping into a vast ocean and just trying to swim your way out, and you don't really know where you're going. You're just looking for some solid ground. Because the sugya of kazoka is the broadest sugya in the entirety of Torah Shebal Peh. Kazoka means so many different things. Kazoka de mikora, kazoka de hashta, cheskes morakama, cheskes moment, and a vast spectrum of kazokas, which I am magdir, kazokas that are based on tfusei hitnahagut shel bnei adam. Trying to translate that into English, behavioral patterns, like kazoka ein udam tovei elam ken yesh loi, kazoka ein udam meis ponov, kazoka Rob Metzion etzel shchita mumchem hem, cheskosei boduk, and so many different kazokas, b'mecha ve'eshas. Ein udam shoyse b'kos Elohim ken bodkoi, so many different, and the common denominator of these chazokas is chazal or kaveya behavioral patterns. Ech b'nei adam nohagim. So there are so many different types of chazokas, but a fundamental question regarding almost all of them is, do we rely on chazoka b'mokom she'efshar levarer? Do we say, this is the halacha, and if this is the halacha, we rely on the halacha, and we don't even care to try to check out things. What is the Metzias? So in Hilchas Shchita, first Perek of Masechet Chulin, we find three different halachas. I think right now you learn some in Yud Ches. So there's a din you need to be boidek a second after Shchita. Even if you were boidek a second before Shchita, the Chatchil you need to be boidek again after Shchita. But if the second is lost, then the behem is kosher. Which means we rely on the kazoka. We know the second was nivdek lifnei shchita, and if it's a second which a shoichet, an authorized shoichet, holds b'mokem miyuchad in his house, you don't even need to be boidek lifnei shchita because you were boidek last time. However, lechatchila you need to be boidek a second after shchita, which is, we do not rely on the kazoka im efshar levarer. And if we were boided the second after shchita, and as of gam, then the shchita is possible. So this is one example. The other one is shoichet. Hakam Rob Metzion it's a shchita mumchemem. And if a person shechted an animal, whether it's a cow or a sheep or a chicken, and he went away, the leisa come on dilashayle. So pashtus in the sugyas mashram, if he's here, you need to check him out. Is he a reliable shoichet? Does he have a kabbalah? Could he yishech? But if he went away, then we're relying on Rav Metzion eitzer shchita mumchem. So in the sugya of sakin it's a chazaka, in the sugya of the shoichet it is a rav, and in both sugyas lechatchila you need to check b'mukim she'efshar levarer. And then I said three sources at the beginning of Chulin, not exactly in the beginning of Chulin, but in Siman Ametes, B'dikas Areya. Lechatchila, you don't need to be boidik chai treifes, but you need to be boidik Areya. And I know that you have some Shimish Lamaisa in Serchus Bereya. And so lechatchila you need to be boidik. But if the Reya is lost, then it's mutar b'di'evet. And those that are machmeh b'di'evet is only ma'u ili chachomem b'dekantam. So these three halachas, and dinei shchita v'treifus and issa v'heter, we see that even though we have a rav or we have a kazoka, rav behemis ksheros, but still you need, if you can, Beli tercha, because theoretically you could check all the treifas, but if it's not a tercha meriba, you need to check. There are two reasons in the Poiskim why B'dikas Arei is different than all the other treifas. Either because Miyut HaMotzui, and I think we had a shir about the Miyut HaMotzui, or because Bekal Efshel Levarer, you open up the animal, the first major organ you see is the Reya, and therefore you need to be boidig the Reya. Regarding the Shoichet, checking out the Shoichet, it's a huge machlokes in the Rishonim. The Rif and the Gaonim. Baruch's Gedoyles, the Rif, quoted in the Rambam, the Rashba, the Ran, all the Rishonim, the beginning of Masechet Sukkah say, if the Shoichet is around and he didn't leave town, you need to check him out and see whether he's a reliable Shoichet. And the Ramban says, we learned this halacha primarily from a sugya Masechet Psochim, a sugya Weiss b'Yudaled, and that is a sugya Psochim that allowed them at Weiss. Person rented a home from a Jewish person, from a frum person, b'Yudaled, Erev Pesach. Does he need to do b'dikas chometz, or could he rely on the kazoka? Probably the balabais was by the chometz. It was in his possession yesterday night, or b'Yudaled. And the maskol of the Gemara is l'skosei bodik. But Avdaled Omed Aleph, when the Gemara brings up this question, and the Gemara asks, L'shayle, why don't we ask him? We can ask the person, was he by the chometz or not? The leisa kamon, he left town, he's not around, so we can't ask him. So the Gemara seems clearly to say, if he is here, you can't rely on cheskes bodik. You need to ask him. And some of the Rishonim say, we learned the din of chilim regarding the shoichet from the din in cheskosei bodik. So there is a kazoka that he was bodik, but still, you need to ask. The Bach in Siman Tov Lamed Zayin is a very strange pshat. When the Gemara asks, Im Ise Kaman, L'shaylei, why don't we ask him? So the Ran and other Rishonim want to prove from this Gemara, if he is around, you need to ask him. Kishe'ef shel avarer lo samchin na kazoka. And the Bach says no. The Gemara merely means to ask, why are you bothering yourself with irrelevant questions? Just ask. Well, why do you need to spend your time now? You're going to spend a week analyzing the sukkah. Could we rely on cheskosei bodak or not? Just save your time. Chabar al hazman. Just ask him. And the Pri Chodesh wonders at the back. That is not the way Chazal learn. That is not the way you learn Gemara. The Gemara asks a practical question. Why are you going to spend your time analyzing a sugya? Just ask the person. That's not the way we learn Gemara. The Pri Chodesh says, if the Gemara says L'shaylei, could I have a Psochim Gemara just to be medayik? I'm going to show you some Chazal. So the maskon of the Gemara is Daladum and Beis, and the Gemara says Cheskosei bodik. Daladum and Aleph. Boy menay Rav Nachman by Yitzchok Hamaska Ma'asech ve'Rabba Bosa Cheskosei bodik and Cheskosei bodik. And the Gemara says Lamay nafkamina L'shaylei. The leise lehai de l'shiyulei. B'atruch alahai mai. He's not around. So the Bach obviously is medayik Lamay nafkamina. L'shaylei. The Lashon Lamay nafkamina is, why are you pestering me with questions? Why don't you just ask? And you won't have any question. But the Pri Chodesh says no. If the Gemara says L'shaylei, that means this is a halacha. And if he's around, you need to ask him. So regarding the Sugya Psochim, we do not find any Rishonim that say, he's in town and still you don't need to ask. But regarding the Sugya, the beginning of Chunin, it's a huge machlokes.
The Bach here is trying to say that if the person had left, so that he's not mechuyev to run after him.
Yeah.
That's meaning once he's already walking out of town, so you don't have to run after. You don't have to be mechuyev to run after him. So even though it doesn't mention the ear, not beer, but how much tircha you have to do, the Bach, because of the dig and is trying to be makel on that you don't have to be mechuyev.
That is a separate question, but I think the Bach also says pshat in the Gemara that you can't prove from here a halacha whether you need or don't need to ask him, because pshat in the Gemara is Why are you asking questions if you could simply ask them? We could check the Bach and Tov Lamed Zayin. So, regarding the din of a shochet, do you need to look for the shochet and verify that he is a reliable shochet? The Rif, the Halachas Gedolos, the Nan, the Ramban, most of the Rishonim say, yes, you need to check him out. The Rashban Torah Sabayis, Bayis Aleph, Shar Aleph, Mamish, the beginning of Torah Sabayis. I don't know whether there's a new version of Torah Sabayis, but everybody quotes Torah Sabayis if you had daf, because sometimes the Shorim are very long. It's from Vav to Dav Zayin, a big arichis. So the Torah Sabayis says you need to ask and check out the shochet if he's available, if he's still in town. And the Ra'ah disagrees. And the Ra'ah says if there's a kazoka and a Rav Mitzuyan Eitz Shchita Mumchamem, even lechatchila, you do not need to check him out. You could rely on the Rav. And how about the Gaonim? So obviously the Ra'ah doesn't feel comfortable going against the Gaonim, and he says the Gaonim only said Midas Chosidus, but it's not a halachic requirement. And the Rashba in Mishmeres Abayis, and this is a very fascinating comment which I will try to talk more about in 10 minutes. The Rashba says, fundamentally you're right, it's a Midas Chosidus, but it's a Midas Chosidus that is Machayev Kol Beis Yisrael. So what type of a Midas Chosidus is that? Is it a halacha or a Midas Chosidus? So the Rashba paskins that you need to verify that this animal was shechted by a reliable shochet, an authorized shochet. The law says, no, if there's a kazoka, if there's a rav, you rely on rav, and you do not need to go any further than that. And the Gaonim just said it's a Midas Chosidus. And the Rashba says it's a Midas Chosidus, but it is binding. It is a Midas Chosidus, which is an obligation, which is a chiyuv. The Balamor, in the beginning of Chilon, is the same opinion as the Ra'ah and Torah Sabayis, and the Ritva. He says the Rebbe, the Ra'ah, and he says, Kein Nere Ikar. And the Ritva sides with the Ra'ah, you do not need to check out the shochet, even if he still is in town. So how come there's a machlokes regarding the beginning of Chulin and regarding Cheskosei Boduk? There is no machlokes. So the Ritva in Chulin says the Ra'ah is right. He was a Talmud of the Ra'ah. You don't need to check out the shochet. In Psuchim, a very short paragraph in the Ritva, he says, Lav kol hachazokos shavois. Lav kol hachazokos shavois. So everybody agrees regarding Cheskosei Boduk that you need to check. So what does he mean, Lav kol hachazokos shavois? And this brings us back to the very first words I said in today's shiur. We're dealing with different chazokas and roiv. So the beginning of Masechet Chulin, roiv mitzuyan eitz shchita mumchameh. Im Sochim it is cheskosei boduk. By bedikas asaken and simen yudches, it's a chazokah de meikora. The saken was checked, and it's a kosher saken. So we're dealing with a chazokah de meikora, one din, with a roiv mitzuyan eitz shchita. B'dika Sareya is a roiv behemoth's ksheros. We do not know. Maybe this behemoth was a treifa meleda, but rov behemoth's ksheros. So out of the four halachas we mentioned, one is a kazoka mikora, two are roiv, and what is cheskosei boduk? Is that a behavioral pattern, or is it a cheskes kashrus that we rely on a person that was probably boidik his bias by night, when this man abedika is a chiyuv. So the Ritva says, Lav kol hachazokos shavois. And does that mean that the chazokah cheskosei bodek is a more convincing chazokah than a roiv mitzuyan eitz shchita mumchameh? Ruba chazokah ruba odif, and roiv overrides a chazokah de meikora. So just like you said, there are many different levels of chazokah, there are different types of roiv as well. First is the ruba de isikaman and ruba de reisikaman. And that is a very fundamental question. Which is more convincing? The Gemara in Chulin Daf Yud Aleph מנולן דזרין ובוסרו, ואחרי רב מנעתס, אשכח רובד עסק אמן, רובד אל עסק אמן מנעין. And we don't say kal v'choyma. So obviously, rubed isik aman is more convincing than rubed el isik aman. Rubed isik aman, we don't go bus in a foshes. Rubed el isik aman, we go bus in a foshes. So what is more convincing? Which is a big shoes, which we won't get into today. But then, there's a Rav HaTori b'minag, or a Rav HaTori b'maisa, and that's a Gemara B'chodesh Chov Gimel. Rav HaTori b'maisa, we don't go. And the Gemara asks, Toysus asks, not the Gemara, Rav Ilas Olach HaCharabal, it's Tori b'maisa. And Toysus says, no, that is nature. It's not exactly nature. It is a behavioral pattern. Rav Ilas Olach HaCharabal. It's not nature. But it's more convincing than Rubbe HaTori b'maisa. So this Rav Mitzvah Etzel Shchita Mumchem Heim, is not a Rav B'Teva Ha'olam. Rav B'Teva Ha'olam is the most powerful Rav. Rav B'Heim is Ksheros. Most people are fertile. That's why we don't need to be choshish that a girl is an islandess or a boy is a soris. Those are the real Ravs. A Rav B'Delesa Kaman, a Rav B'Teva Ha'olam. Rav Mitzvah Etzel Shchita Mumchem Heim is a Rav. However, it's not such a powerful Rav. The schwachste Rav is a Kedushin Afnon. The Ramban and the Rashba and the Ritva and all the Rishonim. Rubbe Misable, V'hoza Mekatsha. When a person sends Sivloina to a woman, do we need to be Choshesh? She's an Eishasish. And the Gemara says no, because most people first send gifts and only then are Mekadosh. Sometimes he's Mekadosh and then he sends the gifts. But in most cases, first he sends gifts and then he's Mekadosh. And we're still Choshesh, L'Kedushin, Im Sholach Sivloinas. So the Rishonim says, it's a Shvach HaRav, because it's a Rav HaTori b'minag. None of them change. Different families, different people, different times. So this is a Shvach HaRav. And Mishum Chumer es Eishasish, we don't rely on the Rav. So just like I said, there are different types of kazokas. There are different levels in Rav. Rav B'Teva Ha'olam. Rav B'minag Ha'olam. Cheskes Kashes is a machlokes based on Ephraim and Pnei Yeshua. Is it based on Rav B'nei Yisur Kshenim? Today we will have a big problem with that Cheskes Kashes. If it's a kazoka da'asim at koyach Rav, that's the Pnei Yeshua. The base of Ephraim says it's a kazoka d'mi'ikora. Every Jewish child, when he's 3 months old, is kosher v'yosher. Tanoik Yishloi Tam Chet. B'tchilosai, everybody is kosher. Maybe until the Bar Mitzvah we could say he didn't do one Aveira. So, Tzemach is what Cheskes Kashrus is. So the Ritva says a klal, Lav kol ha-chazokas shavos, and therefore don't ask me any stiras. Why here tzorach levara and here ain't tzorach levara, and that is why by cheskosei boduk everybody agrees tzorach levara. That's a gemara ferocious. The leisik haman dilishayle, and by shoichet it's a big machlokes, the Rashba and the Ra'al. So the Gaonim said tzorach levara, and with the shoichet that's around, you need to check him out. 3 of the Rishonim, the Ra'al, the Balamor, and the Ritva say ein tzorach levara. So let's have a look beyond Hilchas Shchita and Hilchas Pesach. Very famous halacha in Hilchas Tzitzis Siman Ches. Sheikh Hanoch says before you make a bracha, you put on your tzitzis, you need to be boidik the tzitzis. So why do you need to be boidik the tzitzis? You were boidik yesterday when you put on your talis. Do you need to do it every day? So the Magen Avraham says, Afar Pisha, kazoka that you have kosher tzitzis, efshar levara. Why not? Efshar levara bekal. And therefore, tzorach levara. And the Taz gives another reason. He says, sooner or later your tzitzis is going to be posel. And therefore, The minig nochen is, when will you be mavara? You can't have your tzitzis 100 years, because by the nature of things, nothing is forever. We're not here forever. Every object in this world, besides your neshama, is temporary. So sooner or later, your tzitzis are going to be nifsal. So you might as well check every day. But the Mogen Avraham says this is another example, sorech levara. However, the Mogen Avraham in Tov Lamed Zayin says, why by cheskos abodi sorech levara? Because there's a cheskos chometz. It's a kazoka de me'akora. So it's one kazoka against the other. The kazoka de me'akora says, this house has chometz, and then there's cheskos boduk, which might be a cheskos kashrus. It's a stira between two chazokas, that's why you need to be mavara. So if it says we don't have a stira between two chazokas, so that some surfer asks, the Mogen Avraham at Tov Lamed Zayin doesn't seem to fit in with the Mogen Avraham at Semeches. In both sources he says sorach levara. But in Tov Lamed Zayin he says sorach levara just because there's a cheskes chometz, and we don't have that in Hilches Tzitzis. Einu Eidem choismen ala get, Elohim ken nasa begodoil. And that's the din and din of momentus. If Edom are chosam ala gate, we don't need to check out where the Edom ksherim. Kazoka einu chosam ala gate en kenasa begadol. So there's a story in Ksubas Davchav. Nechsed de Baishatya. Person sold karka, and then we realize that he's not in his proper senses, and we don't know when he signed that shtar, was he in his proper senses or not. But there's another sugya, Bogabasa Kufnun Hey. The person sold a possession and he died. His Yoshim say he was a kohen when he signed that document. Obviously not his children, but his brothers, or his father. The Yoshim say he was a kohen, and therefore the kinyan is invalid. The buyers say, well, he was a gadol. And the Gemara says, you dig up his grave and you check whether Hevi Simonim or not. And that is an interesting shaila. Is it legitimate to take a person out of his grave and check him to resolve a monetary issue? Which is a sugya we'll discuss some other time. But the Gemara says, kazoka masuyem rishtanis la'achar misa. So this is something we can't check. And then the Gemara says, why don't we rely on the kazoka? Ein eidem chasman al shtar, ein ken nasim begadol. Won't we say the same regarding the seller? Is that not the responsibility of the eidem? And the merit proves from this sugya, Kishe'ef she'levarer, we don't rely on chazokas, and he brings the sugya in the beginning of Chulin, and the sugya in the beginning of Tzochim. He brings chazkosei boduk, and he brings a lie from a sugya in Pesach, and Issa v'heter to Choshe Mishpot. We don't rely on the chazoka, the cheskas shtar kosher, Kishe'ef she'levarer. So we have Hilchas Tzitzis, Choshe Mishpot, the merit is of Simen Tzadik Ches and Choshe Mishpot. Kazoka derova. When a kid is 13, we rely that he brought some money, and we don't rely on Kazoka derova b'diuraisa, only by the Rabbanon. What type of a Kazoka is Kazoka derova? It is nature. It would be the equivalent of a Rubit Leise Kaman. It's not a Kazoka Detalia B'minad. Kazoka, when a kid is 13, probably he brought some money. We don't rely on the Kazoka B'diurai, so we do it the Rabbanan. The Prima Godem is Simen Nun Hey. Nun Hey is the Simen of Shliach Tzibor. The Prima Godem wonders, but if Ef Shelavara, why do we rely on Kazoka, even by the Rabbanan? But B'dikas Chometz is the Rabbanan, because B'diurai is a B'bitl B'al Mesagya. And we see, by Chazakosei Bodek, we need to check out. So why do we rely on Chazakosei Derava by the Rabbanans? What? By Chazakosei Bodek. So as we mentioned, the Mogen Avraham. There are many terutzim on the kasha of the prima godim. First of all, who says he was mevatel? Maybe he wasn't mevatel. Instead of Pesach, lachas manasiri, for some reason, maybe he was boidik, but he wasn't mevatel. So it would be sveka d'oraisa. Perik Beisach has chometz amatzah. There's a machlokes Rambam and Ravid regarding Teisha Tziburim of chometz, and one is lost. Do we rely on the Roiv? The Rambam says Kol Kavua Kamechza Mechza. And even though 1 out of the 10 was chometz, and we don't know which one the Achbar took, we need to be machmir. And the Ravid says Sveka d'Rabbanan L'Kula. He was Mavatal Chometz. Sveka d'Rabbanan L'Kula. The Choyvis Bedikas Chometz is only the Rabbanan. The Maggid Mishnah says. By Bedikas Chometz we cannot rely on Sveka d'Rabbanan because the entire Chiv Bedika is B'mokum Sofek. Lechatchil is B'mokum Sofek. And Chazal were Metaken B'mokum Sofek. So the din of Sveka d'Rabbanan L'Kula is not relevant when it comes to Bedikas Chometz. But I'm just saying the Prima Godim applies the same din of Efshel Avarar by kazoka d'Rava, which is a natural kazoka b'teva hu oilam. Kufnun Vav, Even Ha'ezah. And we deal with a person that died and he has no children. But he did have a child that lived 30 days. The Shulchan Aruch paskins that to determine that a child was a bar kiyum and not a nefel, we need 30 days and also nigmeru simonov. And that is tziponov v'saroi. We need to see whether his hair and his nails were developed. That is a sugya b'fnei atzmai. But the Shulchan Aruch says, l'chatchila, we need both. And the Taz says, you need to check that fetus. It's not a fetus, it's a child that was born, but he died after 30 days. If the child is available, you need to check. But if the child was buried or it was taken away, then we rely on Lamed Yoim alone. Because Tzorach Levara, and the Taz brings sources Tzorach Levara. Shloishim Yoim Cheskosai Shu Bar Kiyoma. But Lechatchila is a machlokes in the Gemara. Lechatchila or Machmar, Tzorach Livdoi Saroi Vitziporno, only if that baby is still here. If he was taken away or buried, then we rely on Shloishim Yoim. And the Taz once again says that is a din of Tzorach Levara. So we brought many sources in the concept of Tzorach Levara. Some are Shoni b'Machlokes, some are Kuli al B'Moedim, and the Ritva says, Lo Kal Chazokas Shavois. And the same goes to Rav, and not only to Chazoka. Ruba de Leisa Kamon, Rav Be'ila Tzorach Acharabal, Sanedin Samachtes, is the big sugya, Menolan de Azlina B'Sarov B'Dina Nefoshes. The fundamental sugya Menolan de Azlina B'Sarov is Chulin Daf Yud Aleph. Dina Nefoshes Sanedin Samachtes. And the Gemara proves from Mako Ava Ve'imoy, Dil Malav Avoy. Rav Be'ila Tzorach Acharabal, so it's a Rav. The Yerushalmi at the end of Kiddushin of Mem Zayin, Yerushalmi Kiddushin ends Mem Ches, Mem Zayin, Yerushalmi writes it's a kazoka, and it's a Gemara in Nozer and Babli, that it's a kazoka. If a child grew up in his father's home, we assume that this is the child of his father. So the Babli in Sanhedrin calls a Rav, in Nozir and Yerushalmi Kiddushin is called a kazoka. So there's overlap, and interaction between kazokas and roiv, in different levels and different types of kazoka and roiv. So regarding cheskosei bodek, Shulchan Aruch paskins, if the maskir is in town, you need to ask him. Tov Lamezayin Siv Beis. Regarding shoyet, the mechaber shitosoi. Yoredeya, Siman Aleph Sif Aleph, the very first Sif in Yoredeya. If the shoichet is in town, you need to check him out, whether he's an authorized, reliable shoichet or not. Is this a din d'oraisa or a din d'rabbanan? Is a Pnei Yeshua available easily? Do you know where the Pnei Yeshua is? Chelek Aleph, Sechet Psachim. So there's a fascinating correspondence in Shalosh Teshuvos Chemda Shlomo. Chemda Shlomo was one of the Gedolei Polim. He was the Rav in Varsha. His name is Shlomo Zalman Lipschitz. He was a close friend of the Nesivos. And in Even HaEzer, Teshuvos Chemda Shlomo, there are 5 teshuvos in Tkonis Agunos, Rotzoi V'Shov, Kamara HaBozak. There's Vov Tezayin, there's Yud Zayin, Yud Ches, Yud Tes. 2 of the teshuvos are the Nesivos, and 3 are the Chemda Shlomo. And in Siman Yud Ches, Yud Tes, they have a discussion, Tzorech Levarer, do we rely on love and kazoka? And the Chemda Shlomo assumes that Minat Torah you can't rely on a kazoka and Tzorech Levarer. It's not a din d'rabbanan, but a din d'oraisa. It is not clear what is their understanding. Why would it be a din d'oraisa? But the Chemda Shlomo quotes a marsha in Yevomes Samach Tes. Fascinating marsha and such a gewaldige chiddush. So the marsha in Yevomes Samach Tes. Yevomes Samach Tes says, Bas koyin shenivalu liYisrael toichel betruma. She doesn't become a chalola. She's not an Eishes Ish, and she was nivel to a Jewish person. She's not nifsal, even if it's an aveda to have be'ilu without kiddushin, but it doesn't pass. If she is pregnant from a Yisrael, then she can't eat truma, because if you're carrying a baby that is a Yisrael and not a Kohen, you can't eat truma. And the Gemara asks, Im Kain, why aren't we choshesh? Maybe she's more beres. How do we allow her to eat truma? That's a kasha in the Gemara. And the Mashal says, but why wouldn't we rely on a kazoka d'meikora? She wasn't me'aberes till yesterday, till she was together with this person. So why can't we rely on kazoka and let her eat truma? And the Moshe says, Efshel avarer. How Efshel avarer? Nache gimel chadashim. You learn Hilchos Neder. Yeah? Hakol ha'uber is gimel chadashim. So Efshel avarer. That's a chiddush. Efshel avarer 3 months down the line, that would be considered Efshel avarer. And that is the reason we don't rely on kazoka. So there's a balamora, Beresh Perek Beis from Masechet Ksubos regarding Cheskes Pnuya, and the balamora writes Cheskes Pnuya is not a real kazoka because most of the girls won't stay at Pnuya Kol Yemei Chayegim. I mean, at some stage they all expect to get married, and therefore Cheskes Pnuya is a shvacha kazoka. We would say the same regarding, maybe that is the reason we don't rely on kazoka, or maybe it's a chumrah d'rabbanan, I don't know. But the Mashal says we can't rely on the kazoka because Efshel avarer after 3 months, and that is Efshel avarer. But all the poskim in our sugi say Efshel avarer right here and right now, and bekal. You don't even chase the person out of town and look for him. If he left town, you don't need to go after him. So this Mashal is tzorachim. But they assume that Efshel avarer is a din d'oraisa. And the Pnei Yeshua, not Daf Dalet, but Daf Tes. The Pnei Yeshua has a bigger riches, and the Pnei Yeshua writes, and that's why I asked for a Pnei Yeshua, because I haven't seen it in a while. The Pnei Yeshua writes, Em Efshel avarer, then you can't really call it a suffix. It's not a suffix, because Efshel avarer. Obviously, it's a suffix. Mitzad HaMetzias, it's a suffix. The way I understand the Pnei Yeshua is, Dinei Rav and Chazaka were given lechatchila in situations in which we are confronted with a dilemma. And we cannot solve this dilemma. What do we do? So the Pnei Yeshua says, pure logic. If you could resolve this dilemma, then Rav and Kazoka aren't relevant. Rav and Kazoka were given when you're in a crux, when you're in a dilemma, and you don't know what to do. What does the Halacha say? But if you could be Mavara, then you know what to do. Be Mavara. That is the understanding of the Pnei Yeshua. He does use these words. It's a long Pnei Yeshua. Rabbi Nish, could I ask you, you're so talented. So that's the Pnei Yeshua. And philosophically, I think maybe the Pnei Yeshua, the Shitose from Silvus Tavchov Weiss, another Gavaldig Chiddush of the Pnei Yeshua. Shnayim oimrim esh, shnayim oimrim lo imeis, lo itenosov, im nisis lo teitzei. The mother asks, Habo alei ba'oshem torikui. How could it be nisis lo teitzei? Every time she's going to be with this person, it's an aveda. Shnayim oimrim esh, shnayim oimrim lo imeis. And she has a cheskes seishes ish. The mother answers, Bo'ameres borili. Bo'ameres borili. Pnei Yeshua writes, when the Beis Din doesn't have a chiyuv of onshim, shnayim oimrim esh, shnayim oimrim lo imeis, it's a suffix. Beis Din don't have a chiyuv of onshim. The maximum tafkid Beis Din is lafrusha miyisura. When a person says bodily, he could rely on his own personal conviction, and Beis Din doesn't mix it. When there's din misa, din malchus, we rely on kazokas. But if it's trei, and it's a suffix, and it's not Beis Din's job, only lafrusha miyisura, Beis Din is not machuyev lafrusha miyisura if a person says bodily. Okay, if you think you're okay, go ahead. Beis Din doesn't intervene. And this is a gavaldik chiddush of the Pnei Yeshua. So the Pnei Yeshua learns that chazokas and rav are not definitive. They're not definitive. Even after you have the rav and the kazoka, it's still a suffix. It's not a hachara. And therefore, if a person says borili, trei, there is a cheskes issa. But because trei is a suffix, so I think philosophically, it's two different sugyas legamre. In borili, the person says, I don't have a suffix. What do you want from me? I know, borili, that my husband died. And there are three perushim that are showing him how. What does borili mean? We won't get into that. But the Pnei Yeshua says, yeah, there is a kazoka. But if a person says borili, then we ignore the kazoka. In a way, there is a kazoka. But if you could be mavadal, ignore the kazoka. Chazokas and roiv, all these dinim were given when you have a dilemma. But if you could be mavadal, you don't have a dilemma. So according to the svod of the Mashiach, it might be a din d'oraisa. It might be a din d'oraisa. But my problem with the Pnei Yeshua is, if it's a din d'oraisa, why do all the poskim say so? Emeshel avar bekal. Why bekal? Why do you need to do an effort? Why do you need to chase a guy out of town and check whether he's a proper shlit or not? Why? Dafka mefshel avar bekal. So obviously the Marsho doesn't think it needs to be efshel avar bekal. If you need to wait 3 months to check whether she's pregnant, then the Marsho. But the Marsho isn't a posik, and that's the problem when you learn Marsho. The Marsho says pshat in a Gemara, and he doesn't bring any of the 10 Mekoides we have today. And I didn't even touch Sveika derabona lakura and Sveika lakura im efshel avar. And the Shachan Kloris Sveika Siv Kod Lamed Hay says Sveika im efshel avar. We don't rely on a Sveika. And it's Rashba twice in Masechet Chulin Daf Mem Vav and Daf Nun Gimel. So we have this concept of efshel avar and so many sugyas and Rav Chazok and Sveikas as well. Sveika derabona and Sveika. According to the Shachem, we're not makel.
Tzveik is no different than Rav.
So the Rashba may be the Shittosoi. Svek Svekim etam Rav. But he says Bodif Rav. We had a Shia on Svek Svek, I think, did we?
First day.
What?
First day.
First day. So we're getting there at some stage. So the Baynish found the Pnei Shia. Okay. Kaimanam bepshitas. The Beheche the Somech biyodon she'efshel avarar asofek lo mikrei sofek klal. It's not defined as a suffix. You don't have a suffix, check it out, and you won't have a suffix. This is a Svod Yoraisa. But the Rashba, and I'm going back to that strange Rashba with the Ra'ah. The Ra'ah says, the Geonim, the Rif and the Lochas Gedoyles say you need to check out the Shoichet, that's a Midas Chasidus. And the Rashba Mishmeres Abayis has this interesting line. It's a Midas Chasidus, but it's binding. Ein lahalem ayin mino isol. And that's a halachic principle. It has the nature of a midas chasidus. You have a rav. Ein lahalem ayin mino isol. That's a chasidus svara. But the Rashba says the same regarding b'dikas areya. Because when you open the animal, that's what you see. You can't ignore what you see. You can't ignore what you could check out. By the B'dikas Arei, seeing visually, you see with your eyes. By Rav Mitzuyan, it's a Shlit you don't see with your eyes. But it's obvious. How can you ignore a chashashis? So the Rashba writes that, oh, you're right, it's a Midas Chasidus, but this is the type of Midas Chasidus which is halachically binding. Ein lahalem ayin minu isur. And that is like a shef shalavar. So you rented a house. You want to know whether you need to do b'dikas chometz. You know who the renter is, who the landlord is. Why don't you ask him? Why don't you ask him? And this is a gavaldik chiddush of the Rashba. Ein lahalem ayin minu isur. It's a midas chasidus by nature. And that is probably a Derabonon Dikasvot, and not a Dioraisa Dikasvot. And that is why, if I need to chase him out of town, that's not to consider Malamayan Minuisa. But if he's here, ain't Malamayan. So to end this Shir, today I'm just giving a lot of thoughts. Could I have an Avodah Zorah before? Avodah Zorah Lamed Zayin Omed Weiss. We have Halacha, Sofek Tomeh B'Shus Arabim Tohoyor. And it's a Halacha Moshe Messinai, Sofek Tomeh B'Shus Yochel, and Sofek Tomeh B'Shus Arabim. And the Gemara says, and Avodah Zorah Lamed Zayin Omed Weiss Halacha Ve'ein Moirim Kein. But it's a Halacha Moshe Messinai. Halacha Ve'ein Moirim Kein. And then there's an interesting expression in the Gemara. Sofek Tomeh B'Shus Arabim Hiter Lehen. Omri V'echan Halacha Ve'ein Moirim Kein. V'osiyah V'oiralei, Oriyah. One of the Amorim did paskin. Tanya Namocha, Rav Yudoyma. Kodesh Osem. Ad kan Shus Arabim, Ad kan Shus Yochel. Ki Osem Lakam de Rav Yanai, Omelahu. V'maya B'shikas de Nahara. Zilut Mulu. Rav Yanai said, what's your argument? We live right next to the river. No table. And that is why Halacha Ve'ein Moirim Kein. L'halacha is Sofek Tomeh B'Shus Arabim Toyer. And most of the Rishonim say it's Halacha Moshe Messinai. Some Rishonim say only B'Shus Yochel Tomeh is Halacha Moshe Messinai. B'Shus Arabim Toyer is Machmes Cheskas Tahar. But some Rishonim say no, both Dinam are Halacha Moshe Messinai. But Rav Yanai says, what are you fighting about? Humaya B'Shikas Nahara. You know, there's a river down here. Go jump into the river. I think that is the svod of the Rashba. So philosophically, even when the Torah is matir asofik, I wrote about this about Reb Shimon. According to the Rambam, Sveka diuraisim and the Torah lekula. Is the person nanash? Does that mean there is no avera? Or it's an avera at the end of the day. you might be nichshel. But you don't need to be choishish. So Rav Yani says, I mean, so in Avodah Zorah Lamed Zayin, it's not efshel avarer, but efshel leftor et dilemma. Efshel leftor et abaya. So what are you going to rely on? Sfeikes, by a sofik tuma? You might be stepping on a landmine. So go toivel. So yeah, Dovshesh material is always waiting. You need to wait somewhat. Fundamentally, maybe yes, but it's in the Rabbah. So what we achieved today's shir is totally in clarity. But there's maybe I shouldn't say this in a shir, but sometimes I say silly things. There's an expression in Latin, which is docta ignorantia, which is intelligent ignorance. So today, we saw a very broad picture of Efshel Avaret, many sugis. And I think one of the mafteches is the ritvo, lav kol kazoka shovus. So by tzitzis we have many different explanations. Why do you need to be boidik? Why don't you rely on a kazoka? By Shlit it's a machlokes, a huge machlokes between the Rishonim. Cheskosei bodik, everybody agrees you need to be boidik. If you can, check it out. So we had the Pnei Yeshua, which seems to say it's not a suffix, and that is a din d'oraisa. The Rashba B'mi is a gewaldige metzia. He says it's a midas chosidus, but it's a midas chosidus which becomes a halacha. Ein lahala mayim minuis. And maybe it has a shaykhus with the Gemara in Avodah Zorah, but we need to check the Rishonim. There aren't many Rishonim in Avodah Zorah. The Ritva in Avodah Zorah is special. I didn't check the Ritva whether he has something to say about the Zorah Lamed Zayin based. So today we spoke about Hilchos Pesach, and we spoke about Hilchos Shchita, and as always, it's a tonic to be in Koilom. So we don't have any time to speak Divrei Chizuk, and that will be after Pesach. So we have a very, very special occasion. I wasn't asked to speak about it, but I can't not speak about it. And others say for Shiurim, our beloved Rosh Koilo, and it makes me so proud. So the Kate Tiska, the Hatchel, the Messiah, Sforim, and he should be so that I can declare that it's wonderful Thank you.